Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the spring of 1901, in the rugged hill country of Stone County, Missouri, approximately 22 miles southwest of Galena, 14 people vanished without a trace from an underground church carved into limestone beneath the Ozark Hills. The disappearance of the Harland brothers and their devoted followers would become one of the most perplexing mysteries in American religious history. A case that remained largely unknown until archival discoveries in 1967 revealed the full extent of what had transpired in that remote hollow. The post-frontier Ozarks of 1901 were experiencing waves of religious revival, with itinerant preachers and new spiritual movements finding fertile ground among isolated communities hungry for meaning and connection. It was into this environment that Elijah and Silas Harland arrived, presenting themselves as missionaries bringing enlightenment to the scattered homesteaders of the Missouri Hills. What began as a seemingly conventional religious mission would evolve into something far more disturbing, culminating in a mass disappearance that defied explanation and challenged the very foundations of community memory. The case of the Harland Brothers Underground Church represents not merely a historical curiosity, but a window into the dangerous intersection of isolation, charismatic leadership, and religious fervor that could flourish in the hidden valleys of rural America. County records show that the events began innocuously enough when two well-spoken brothers from Pennsylvania purchased land in a remote hollow and announced their intention to establish a Reformed apostolic mission. The investigation that followed their disappearance would uncover an elaborate underground complex, journals documenting increasingly unorthodox beliefs, and evidence of a final ceremony from which no participant would ever emerge. This is the documented account of the Harland brothers and their followers, assembled from sheriff's reports, personal testimonies, architectural surveys, and the brothers' own writings, a story that reminds us how completely people could vanish even in the modern era, leaving behind only carved symbols in stone and unanswered questions that echo through the decades like prayers in an empty chamber. In March 1898, two brothers arrived in Stone County, Missouri, their wagon loaded with books, building supplies, and the stated intention of bringing spiritual enlightenment to the scattered homesteads of the Ozark Hills. Elijah Harland, aged 41, and his younger brother Silas, aged 38, presented themselves as educated men of God, speaking with the refined accents of the eastern states and carrying letters of introduction that, while later proven fictitious, initially satisfied the cautious rural community. County records preserved in the Stone County Courthouse document their purchase of 160 acres in a remote hollow known locally as Cotter's Valley, a parcel of rocky, timbered land bisected by a seasonal creek and surrounded by steep limestone bluffs that created a natural amphitheater of isolation. The seller, an elderly widow named Margaret Cotter, would later tell neighbors that the brothers had paid in gold coins and seemed particularly interested in the geological features of the property, asking detailed questions about caves, springs, and the stability of the underlying rock. The Galena Weekly newspaper from April 1898 contains a small notice announcing the establishment of the Reformed Apostolic Mission, describing the brothers as formerly of Pennsylvania and trained in theological studies, though no verification of their educational claims was apparently sought or provided. Initial community reception was cautiously welcoming, as documented in several surviving letters from local residents to relatives in other counties, with descriptions of the brothers as peculiar but harmless, more refined than the typical traveling preacher, but seemingly sincere in their religious convictions. The brothers wasted no time in beginning construction of their chapel, hiring local laborers and purchasing materials from merchants in Galena, with Elijah supervising the work while Silas made frequent trips to Springfield and even St. Louis for specialized supplies. By late summer of 1898, A modest timber chapel stood in a clearing near the center of their property, its simple exterior giving no hint of the elaborate excavations that had already begun beneath its foundation. Early attendees of the brothers' services, whose testimonies would later be collected during the 1901 investigation, described conventional enough beginnings with Presbyterian-influenced worship, careful biblical exposition, and an emphasis on personal salvation that differed little from other Protestant missions, except perhaps in the intensity of Elijah's delivery and the haunting quality of the hymns Silas played on the small organ they had transported from the East. The chapel itself appeared unremarkable to casual observers, a rectangular timber structure measuring 30 feet by 20 feet, its exterior whitewashed annually to gleam like a beacon against the dark forest backdrop, topped with a hand-carved wooden cross that Elijah had reportedly fashioned himself during their first weeks on the property. Inside, according to photographs taken during the 1901 investigation and preserved in state archives, rough-hewn pews could accommodate perhaps 40 worshippers, facing a simple pulpit and the aforementioned organ, with windows of plain glass allowing natural light to illuminate the space during daytime services. But it was what lay beneath this modest sanctuary that would later capture investigators' attention, for the building permits filed with the county showed that the brothers had insisted on excavating a foundation far deeper than necessary, claiming needs for cold storage and protection from the fierce Ozarks storms and Francesca's age, paying extra fees to mollify concerned officials who questioned the extent of the digging. Silas Harland proved to be not merely an accomplished organist, but a compelling choir director, training a small group of local residents in what witnesses described as ancient hymns, with words that seemed familiar yet strangely altered, melodies that lingered in the mind long after services ended. The congregation grew steadily through 1898 and into 1899, drawing primarily from isolated homesteads within a 10-mile radius, families who had previously traveled much farther for irregular circuit preacher visits and now found in the Harland brothers a consistent source of spiritual guidance. Sarah Morrison, who attended services throughout this early period, would later testify that Elijah's sermons initially focused on conventional themes of redemption and righteous living, but gradually introduced concepts she found unsettling, though difficult to articulate. Speaking of Christianity's corrupted translations and lost mysteries, preserved only for the truly faithful, by December 1898, regular Sunday services were drawing 25 to 30 attendees, with additional evening prayer meetings on Wednesdays that began to feature what Elijah called instruction in deeper truths, sessions that would eventually become restricted to only the most dedicated followers. The brothers' attention to their chapel's foundation continued even after the building's completion, with sounds of digging and construction echoing from the property on quiet nights, explained when questioned as necessary improvements to protect their growing library of theological texts from moisture and rodents. Though no one was permitted to inspect these supposed storage areas, the financial prosperity of the Harland mission puzzled many in the community, given that their congregation consisted primarily of subsistence farmers and laborers who could barely afford basic necessities. Yet the brothers consistently paid cash for supplies and made improvements to their property that suggested resources far beyond what collection plate offerings could provide. Land records from 1899 show the brothers purchasing adjacent parcels, expanding their holdings to nearly 300 acres, always paying in gold or bank drafts drawn on Eastern institutions, leading to speculation about family wealth or mysterious benefactors supporting their evangelical work. Their request for donations took unusual forms, eschewing monetary contributions in favor of specific materials like limestone, quality timber, metal implements, and particularly quicklime in quantities that raised eyebrows among local merchants who nevertheless appreciated the business. Martha Tompkins, whose diary was discovered in her family's attic in 1967, recorded her observations of wagons arriving at the mission property after dark and loaded with supplies that seemed excessive for a simple religious community, while her husband Daniel spoke of being hired for foundation work but sworn to secrecy about what he had seen beneath the chapel. The introduction of special services for committed believers in early 1899 marked a subtle but significant shift in the mission's operation, with certain congregation members invited to remain after regular Sunday worship for additional instruction that other attendees were told focused on advanced biblical interpretation and preparation for leadership roles. Personal correspondence between concerned family members, preserved in the collections of the Stone County Historical Society, reveals growing unease about loved ones' increasing dedication to the Harland brothers, with mentions of substantial financial contributions, property mortgages taken to support the mission's work, and a gradual withdrawal from family and community relationships outside the congregation. Elijah's sermons during this period, partially reconstructed from notes taken by attendees, began incorporating references to ancient Christian mysteries, pre-Nicene traditions, and wisdom preserved from corruption by select faithful throughout the centuries. Themes that would have seemed heretical to mainstream Protestant denominations, but were presented with such scholarly authority and scriptural support that questioning voices were effectively silenced. The physical transformation of the mission property accelerated through 1899, with new outbuildings appearing, extensive gardens planted with varieties of herbs and plants unfamiliar to local farmers, and the constant presence of inner circle members who had taken up residence in small cabins built near the main chapel, creating an increasingly insular community within the larger settlement. By early 1899, 12 individuals had distinguished themselves as the Harland brothers' most devoted followers, forming an inner circle that would ultimately share their leader's mysterious fate. The composition of this group, documented through census records, family histories, and later investigation reports, represented a cross-section of rural Missouri society bound together by their absolute faith in the brothers' teachings. James and Sarah Kellum, aged 42 and 39 respectively, along with their son Daniel, 19, had been among the mission's earliest congregants, with James mortgaging their 80-acre farm to provide funds for what Elijah described as essential preparations for the coming age of spiritual transformation. Martha Preston, a 51-year-old widow who had lost her husband and 2 sons to typhoid fever, found in the brothers' promises of reunion with the departed a comfort that traditional churches had failed to provide, eventually selling her boarding house in Galena to live permanently at the mission. Brothers Ezra and Caleb Morrison, 35 and 33, bachelor farmers known for their scholarly inclinations despite limited formal education, became Elijah's most eager students, spending hours in theological discussions and assisting with the translation of texts the brothers claimed to have acquired from European sources. Eleanor Chase, 47, widowed like Martha Preston but from more prosperous circumstances, provided substantial financial support while becoming Silas's assistant in preparing the musical portions of their increasingly elaborate ceremonies. Thomas Garrett, a 8-year-old farmhand with no family ties, found in the mission community the belonging he had never experienced elsewhere, dedicating himself completely to the physical labor of expanding the underground chambers. The remaining members of the inner circle, whose names appear in various records but whose personal histories remained less documented, included Mary Hutchins, a former school teacher, brothers William and Robert Donnelly, Irish immigrants who had arrived in Missouri only months before encountering the Harlands, and Samuel Peters, an elderly veteran of the Civil War who claimed the brothers had healed his persistent war wounds through prayer and sacred knowledge. These 12 individuals began attending exclusive evening instruction sessions, gatherings that other congregants were told focused on preparing future mission leaders but which, according to journal entries later discovered, actually involved initiation into what the brothers called the true mysteries preserved from Christianity's original form. The spring of 1900 brought the first documented concerns about the Harland mission to official attention, initiated by Reverend Marcus Thornhill of Galena's Methodist congregation, whose letter to the regional church authority expressed alarm about reports of unorthodox teachings emanating from Cotter's Valley. Thornhill's carefully worded complaint, preserved in Methodist church archives, described former members of established congregations being drawn away by promises of secret knowledge and spiritual powers and with specific mention of the Harland's claims that mainstream Christianity had deliberately suppressed truths necessary for salvation. Sheriff William Blackwood, a cautious lawman who had served Stone County since 1885, began receiving informal complaints about strange activities at the mission, but found himself constrained by the lack of any clear legal violations and the reluctance of witnesses to provide formal statements. Personal journals from this period, discovered during historical research in 1968, paint a picture of growing community unease, expressed in whispered conversations and careful observations rather than direct confrontation. Rebecca Hartwell's diary describes her nephew returning from an evening at the mission with pupils dilated and speaking in a rambling manner about doorways between worlds and the approaching harvest of souls, though by morning he claimed no memory of such statements. The transformation of inner circle members became increasingly apparent, with formerly gregarious individuals becoming withdrawn from everyone outside the mission community, responding to concerned inquiries with vague assurances that all would be revealed when the time of preparation was complete. Nighttime activities at the mission property intensified, with multiple witnesses reporting processions of robed figures moving between buildings, carrying lanterns, and chanting in what seemed to be Latin, mixed with other unidentifiable languages. The singing that emerged from the chapel during these nocturnal gatherings was described by those who heard it as unlike any Christian hymns, with harmonies that seemed to come from more voices than the known number of participants and words that, while hauntingly beautiful, left listeners with an inexplicable sense of dread. Sheriff Blackwood's private notes, discovered in his family's papers in 1954, reveal his growing concern tempered by jurisdictional limitations, writing that, without evidence of actual crimes, his hands were tied regarding what appeared to be merely unusual religious practices, though he instructed his deputies to maintain awareness of activities around the mission property. The disappearance of Daniel Kellum on the 15th of October 1900 marked the first concrete incident that demanded official investigation, though the response would prove frustratingly inconclusive and only deepen the mystery surrounding the Harland mission. Daniel, employed at Henderson's lumber mill in Galena, had been a reliable worker who never missed a day without notice, making his sudden absence sufficiently unusual that his employer, after 3 days, felt compelled to report it to authorities. Sheriff Blackwood's investigation, documented in official reports that survive in county archives, began with a visit to the Kellum family farm, where he found the property largely abandoned except for basic maintenance, with neighbors reporting that James and Sarah Kellum had been staying at the mission property for several weeks. At the mission, Blackwood found Daniel's parents calm to the point of seeming sedated, insisting their son was well but had departed on important spiritual work, though they could not or would not specify his destination beyond vague references to spreading the word in Arkansas. The Harland brothers, particularly Elijah, proved superficially cooperative but essentially unhelpful, maintaining that young Daniel had experienced a powerful calling during a prayer vigil and felt compelled to begin his own ministry, taking only basic supplies and traveling clothes. The discovery of Daniel's horse in the mission's stable and his personal effects, including a rifle he was known to treasure in the cabin his parents occupied, contradicted the narrative of a planned departure, details Blackwood noted but could not use as evidence of foul play without a body or witness testimony. The sheriff's private notes reveal deep suspicion about the circumstances, particularly what he described as the unnatural composure of the Kellums and the rehearsed quality of everyone's explanations, writing that it felt as though all parties were reciting from a script they had memorized. The investigation stalled when Daniel's parents refused to file a formal missing person report, insisting their son would return when his work was complete, and without their cooperation or any evidence of violence, Blackwood had no legal grounds to pursue the matter further. The case file remained open but inactive, another unsolved disappearance in a region where people sometimes vanished into the vast wilderness or simply chose to start new lives elsewhere, though Blackwood would later note that in 20 years of law enforcement, he had never encountered a missing person case where the family showed so little concern. The winter months of 1900 to 1901 saw the Harland mission withdraw almost entirely from interaction with the broader community, creating an island of secretive activity in the midst of the Ozark Hills. Regular Sunday services, which had once welcomed all seekers, ceased entirely by December, with a hand-painted sign at the property entrance declaring the grounds private and restricted to members only. The inner circle members, now expanded to include Eleanor Chase and Thomas Garrett, were rarely seen in Galena or neighboring settlements, their absence from familiar routines noted with growing concern by those who had known them before their involvement with the mission. County records reveal unusual purchase patterns during this period, with the brothers ordering through intermediaries rather than appearing personally in town, acquiring massive quantities of candles from suppliers in Springfield, specific herbs and incense materials shipped from Street Louis apothecaries, and commissioning metalwork of unclear purpose from blacksmiths, who later described the requested items as resembling ceremonial implements rather than practical tools. Letters between family members, preserved in private collections and historical society archives, paint a picture of mounting anxiety about relatives who had essentially disappeared behind the mission's boundaries, with one particularly poignant correspondence from Martha Preston's sister describing her failed attempt to visit, being turned away at the gate by Thomas Garrett, who insisted that Sister Martha was engaged in sacred preparations that could not be interrupted. The few glimpses outsiders had of mission activities came from farmers whose properties bordered the Harland's expanded holdings, reporting robed figures moving between buildings in the pre-dawn hours, strange lights emanating from the chapel at times when no services were supposedly being held, and on several occasions what appeared to be processions heading into the woods with purposes unknown. A detailed diary entry from Jonathan Mills, whose farm overlooked part of the mission property, describes watching through his telescope on a clear January night as approximately a dozen figures in white robes circled the chapel 7 times while carrying torches, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested extensive practice, before disappearing as one into the building's entrance. The sounds emanating from the property during these winter months were equally disturbing to those who heard them, described variously as chanting, singing, and sometimes agonized crying, though the distance and natural acoustic properties of the valley made it impossible to determine their exact nature or source. March 1901 brought an unexpected and unsettling development when Elijah Harland emerged from months of isolation to appear in Galena's public square, posting notices on buildings and telegraph poles announcing a great revival and revelation to be held at the mission on the night of April 30th. The notices themselves, several of which were preserved and now rest in historical society archives, featured language that alarmed local clergy and civic leaders with their references to those who seek truth beyond the veil and promises of witnessing the dawn of a new spiritual age for those brave enough to shed the chains of corrupted doctrine. Reverend Thornhill, already concerned about the mission's influence, attempted to visit the property to discuss these announcements directly with the brothers, but was met at the gate by Silas Harland, who politely but firmly refused entry, stating that the grounds were being sanctified for the coming gathering and no one not already initiated into their mysteries could be permitted to enter. The Reverend's subsequent letter to Sheriff Blackwood, preserved in county records, expressed deep concern about what he termed clear signs of dangerous delusion, if not outright heresy, urging investigation before the planned gathering could take place. Blackwood's official inspection of the 12th of April 1901, documented in detail in his report, describes significant changes to the mission property, including new outbuildings whose purposes were unclear, extensive gardens containing plants he could not identify, despite his familiarity with local flora, and most notably, the complete covering of the chapel's windows from the inside, with what appeared to be black cloth or paint. The sheriff was permitted only to inspect the grounds and building exteriors, with Elijah Harland maintaining that the chapel interior was undergoing sacred preparations that would be profaned by the presence of the uninitiated, a restriction Blackwood reluctantly accepted, given the lack of legal grounds for forced entry. Community response to the revival announcement was mixed, with some dismissing it as the culmination of the brothers' increasing eccentricity, while others, particularly those who had lost family members to the mission's influence, saw it as an opportunity to perhaps reconnect with their loved ones. The atmosphere in Galena and surrounding communities throughout April grew increasingly tense, with some planning to attend out of curiosity or concern, while others spoke of organizing to prevent what they feared might be some form of mass deception or worse. Elijah Harland made one final appearance in town on April 28th, purchasing final supplies and telling the general store proprietor that after the revelation of April 30th, the nature of their mission would be forever transformed, and all would understand the necessity of their years of preparation. The events of the 30th of April 1901 were reconstructed from the testimonies of 17 witnesses who attended the early portions of the gathering but departed before the final, fatal ceremony that claimed the Harland brothers and their inner circle. The evening began conventionally enough, with approximately 40 to 50 people arriving at the mission as dusk fell, some drawn by curiosity, others by genuine spiritual seeking, and a few hoping to reconnect with family members who had disappeared into the mission's exclusive community. The initial proceedings, held in an open area near the chapel as the building itself remained closed, resembled a traditional revival meeting, with Elijah Harland preaching with his characteristic intensity about the corruption of established churches and the imminent return to true spiritual knowledge. As full darkness descended, pine torches were lit around the gathering space, and Silas led the assembly in hymns that began familiarly but gradually shifted into melodies and words that witnesses later struggled to describe, ancient-sounding yet disturbingly compelling. After approximately 2 hours of preaching and singing, Elijah announced that the time had come for the true revelation, but stated that only those who had undergone proper preparation could witness what would transpire in the sanctified space below, gesturing toward the chapel, whose dark windows reflected the torchlight like dead eyes. The inner circle members, dressed now in white robes they had apparently donned during the service, rose as one and began moving toward the chapel, their faces showing what witnesses described as rapturous anticipation mixed with something akin to fear. Several family members of inner circle congregants attempted to follow but were gently but firmly turned back by Thomas Garrett and the Morrison brothers, but Amos DeBee, who explained that the uninitiated could not survive what they were about to witness without proper spiritual conditioning. The 12 disciples and 2 brothers entered the chapel, closing and, from the sounds clearly audible outside, barring the door behind them, leaving the remaining assembly in confused discussion about whether to wait or depart. Over the next 2 hours, those who remained, their number dwindling as unease grew, reported hearing sounds from within the chapel that defied easy description, rhythmic chanting in unknown languages, music that seemed to come from instruments none could identify, and, at times, vibrations that seemed to rise from the earth itself rather than the building. By 2 a.m., with no one having emerged from the chapel and the sounds from within having ceased entirely for nearly an hour, the remaining witnesses departed, some immediately writing to alert authorities, while others simply returned home, unwilling to investigate further in the darkness. Sheriff William Blackwood arrived at the mission at first light on the 1st of May 1901, accompanied by 3 deputies and, at his specific request, Reverend Thornhill, whose theological knowledge he thought might prove useful in understanding what they might find. The scene that greeted them was eerily peaceful, with morning mist rising from the valley and birds singing in the surrounding trees, but the chapel door standing open when witnesses swore it had been barred from within the night before. The interior of the chapel, as documented in Blackwood's detailed report and supplemented by photographs taken that morning, was completely empty of people, but showed clear signs of recent activity, with candles burned to nubs, strange symbols drawn in what appeared to be ash on the floor, and most significantly, a previously hidden trapdoor in the floor standing open to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. The sheriff's initial calls down the stairway received no response except their own echoes, and the air rising from below carried a scent the men could not identify, sweet yet somehow corrupt, with an undertone of ozone, as if lightning had recently struck. After securing lanterns and leaving one deputy to guard the entrance, Blackwood descended with Deputy Harrison and Reverend Thornhill, finding themselves in a narrow passage carved from solid limestone, its walls showing tool marks, indicating years of painstaking excavation. The passage extended horizontally into the hill for approximately 60 feet before opening into a larger chamber that took their breath away. A perfectly circular room carved from the living rock, with a domed ceiling rising 15 feet at its center, every surface covered with intricate symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering lantern light. The floor of this central chamber showed evidence of recent ceremony, with the remains of a fire in a central pit, personal belongings scattered about, including clothing and jewelry recognized as belonging to the missing congregants, and, most disturbing, a series of human-shaped impressions in what appeared to be ash or fine sand arranged in a circle around the walls. No bodies were found, no blood or signs of violence, just the abandoned possessions of 14 people who had seemingly vanished from a chamber with only one entrance and leaving behind only these mysterious impressions and the lingering scent of something beyond identification. The full exploration of the underground complex beneath the Harland Mission Chapel revealed a labyrinthine network of passages and chambers that testified to years of obsessive excavation and construction. Sheriff Blackwood's investigation team, reinforced by additional deputies and volunteers from Galena, spent 3 days mapping the complex, discovering over 400 feet of passages connecting 8 distinct chambers, each serving specific purposes that became clear through the artifacts and modifications found within them. The main ceremonial chamber, with its dome and carved symbols, proved to be merely the beginning, with passages radiating outward like spokes from a wheel, leading to spaces that included sleeping quarters with stone shelves carved from the walls, storage rooms containing enough preserved food and water for months of underground habitation, and what appeared to be a library or study containing hundreds of books in multiple languages. The construction itself, documented through detailed sketches and later photographs, showed remarkable engineering knowledge, with supporting pillars left at stress points, drainage channels to prevent flooding, and ventilation shafts disguised as natural formations on the hillside above. One chamber, which investigators designated the preparation room, contained robes, ceremonial implements fashioned from various metals, and bottles of oils and compounds that chemical analysis would later identify as psychoactive substances derived from various plants, some native to the Ozarks and others clearly imported from distant sources. The most disturbing discovery came in what the team termed the meditation cells, a series of 7 small chambers barely large enough for a person to stand upright, with walls covered in the same symbolic writing found throughout the complex and showing evidence of prolonged occupation, including worn spots where occupants had clearly spent hours pressed against the stone. Throughout the complex, investigators found personal journals belonging to Inner Circle members, their pages filled with increasingly frantic spiritual revelations, mathematical calculations attempting to determine optimal dates for transcendence, and detailed instructions for ceremonies that blended Christian mysticism with elements drawn from sources investigators could not identify. The photography from the investigation, though limited by 1901 technology, captured the overwhelming scale of the undertaking, with some passages extending so far into the hillside that investigators feared structural collapse and discontinued their exploration, sealing several tunnels that appeared to continue even deeper into the earth. The journals of Elijah Harland, discovered in a locked chest within the underground library and eventually preserved in state archives after extensive legal proceedings, provided the most complete window into the brothers' true beliefs and intentions. Written in a precise hand that grew increasingly erratic in later entries, the journals revealed that the Harland brothers were not the simple missionaries they had claimed to be, but former members of various esoteric spiritual movements in Pennsylvania and Ohio who had been expelled for what their organizations deemed dangerous interpretations of sacred mysteries. Elijah's writings detailed a complex theological system that viewed mainstream Christianity as a deliberate corruption of original truths, with authentic spiritual knowledge preserved only in fragments scattered across various mystical traditions that the brothers claim to have spent years studying and synthesizing. The entries from 1896 to 1897 describe their decision to establish their own spiritual community in a location revealed through what Elijah termed divine mathematics, with the specific spot in the Missouri Ozarks chosen for geological and astronomical alignments they believed would facilitate contact with higher spiritual realms. Silas's technical journal, focused more on the practical aspects of their undertaking, contained detailed architectural plans for the underground complex that showed construction had begun immediately upon their arrival in 1898, with the public chapel serving merely as camouflage for their true work below. The brothers' conception of human spiritual evolution, as revealed through these documents, centered on the belief that physical bodies were temporary vessels that could be transcended through proper preparation and ritual, allowing consciousness to migrate to higher dimensional states they termed the true kingdom. References to ancient texts, some cited by name and others described only through cryptic allusions, suggested the brothers had access to or believed they had reconstructed ceremonial practices from pre-Christian mystery religions, Gnostic sects, and other sources they claimed had been suppressed by Orthodox Christianity. The final entries from April 1901 showed both brothers' absolute conviction that they had discovered the proper formulation of ceremonies, astronomical timing, and spiritual preparation necessary to achieve what they called corporeal transcendence, with Elijah writing that the faithful would shed their material forms like serpents shed skin, emerging as beings of pure consciousness, capable of existing between the physical and spiritual worlds. The investigation's expansion beyond the mission property involved what became the largest search operation in Stone County history, with over 100 volunteers combing the surrounding hills, caves, and waterways for any trace of the 14 missing people. Search teams explored every known cave within a 10-mile radius, dredged sections of nearby creeks and ponds, and even excavated suspicious depressions in the forest floor, but found no human remains or evidence of the vanished congregation. Telegraph messages sent to law enforcement agencies across Missouri, Arkansas, Kansas, and beyond requested information about any individuals matching the descriptions of the missing, but no confirmed sightings ever emerged, despite rewards offered by family members. The discovery of the sealed chamber came only after investigators noticed subtle differences in the construction of one wall in the deepest part of the complex, leading to careful demolition that revealed a hidden room containing perhaps the most unsettling findings of the entire investigation. This chamber contained 13 niches carved into the walls, each holding personal effects clearly belonging to specific inner circle members, arranged with ceremonial precision, including locks of hair, written testimonials expressing readiness for transformation, and items of deep personal significance like wedding rings, family photographs, and, in one niche, Daniel Kellam's prized pocket watch. The 14th and 15th niches, slightly larger and more elaborately carved, contained items belonging to the Harland brothers themselves, including Elijah's personal Bible, annotated with marginal notes in multiple languages, and Silas's tuning fork, which, when struck, produced a tone that several investigators reported caused disturbing psychological effects, including vertigo and brief auditory hallucinations. The arrangement suggested a deliberate ritualistic placement, as if the occupants had ceremonially divested themselves of all earthly connections before undertaking whatever final transformation they believed awaited them. Chemical analysis of residues found in ceremonial vessels discovered in the chamber revealed traces of compounds that modern analysis would identify as powerful psychoactive substances, including derivatives of local plants like Jimson weed mixed with imported substances, suggesting the possible use of chemical aids to induce altered states of consciousness during ceremonies. The search continued for 6 weeks before officials reluctantly concluded that wherever the 14 people had gone, they had left no physical trace that contemporary investigative methods could discover. leading to the official classification of the case as a mass disappearance under mysterious circumstances. The aftermath of the Harland mission disappearance sent shockwaves through the rural communities of the Missouri Ozarks that resonated for generations, fundamentally altering local attitudes toward religious movements and creating a folklore tradition that persists to this day. Within days of the investigation becoming public knowledge, reporters from St. Louis, Kansas City, and even eastern newspapers descended on Stone County, their sensationalized accounts spreading the story across the nation and bringing unwanted attention to a region that valued its privacy. The chapel and surface buildings of the mission were destroyed by fire on the 17th of July, 1901, with witnesses reporting seeing the flames from miles away, though no perpetrator was ever identified, and many locals privately supported what they saw as a cleansing of a cursed place. County authorities, faced with the dangerous condition of the underground complex and pressure from disturbed citizens, made the decision to seal the entrance with concrete and rubble, though not before researchers and curiosity seekers had removed numerous artifacts, many of which disappeared into private collections. The families of the missing faced the agonizing legal and emotional process of having their loved ones declared legally dead, a process delayed by the unusual circumstances and the lack of bodies, with some family members clinging to hope that their relatives had somehow survived and would return. Religious leaders throughout the region used the Harland case as a cautionary tale in sermons, warning against the dangers of spiritual pride, secret knowledge, and deviation from established doctrine, though some progressive theologians argued that the real lesson was the need for churches to address the spiritual hunger that made people vulnerable to such movements. The property itself passed through a series of short-term owners, none staying more than a year or two before selling at a loss, with consistent reports of unease, unexplained sounds, and what some described as an oppressive atmosphere that made normal habitation impossible. Local folklore quickly developed around the site, with stories of ghostly figures seen on the anniversary of the disappearance, mysterious lights emerging from the ground where the sealed entrance lay, and claims that sensitive individuals could still hear chanting and singing from beneath the earth. The economic impact on the region included the loss of tourism as the area gained a reputation for dark happenings, though this same notoriety would decades later attract a different kind of visitor interested in mysteries and the paranormal. Reverend Thornhill's series of sermons addressing the tragedy, preserved in church records, reveal his struggle to provide theological comfort while warning against the exact type of spiritual seeking that had led to the disaster, noting that the devil often appears as an angel of light, offering secret wisdom to the prideful. For over 6 decades, the Harland mission case faded from active memory into the realm of regional folklore, kept alive primarily through oral tradition and occasional mentions in books about American religious movements or mysterious disappearances. The 1,920 seconds brought brief renewed interest when construction workers building a new road through the area reported finding carved stones bearing symbols matching those documented in the underground complex, though these stones mysteriously disappeared before experts could examine them. During the 1,930 seconds, the Federal Writers Project interviewed elderly residents who remembered the Harland brothers, with these testimonials providing valuable details about the mission's early days and the gradual transformation of its followers, including Sarah Morrison's poignant recollection of her brother Ezra's final visit home, where he spoke of soon achieving a state beyond death or life, as commonly understood. The World War II years saw the story largely forgotten as more pressing concerns occupied the nation, though military training exercises in the Ozarks occasionally reported the area around the former mission as having unusual magnetic properties that interfered with compass readings. The 1,950 seconds brought amateur investigators interested in the paranormal, though their sensationalized accounts did little to advance understanding of what had actually occurred, often adding supernatural embellishments that obscured the historical facts. Property records from this period show the land changing hands multiple times, always sold at below market prices, with several owners attempting to develop the site, only to abandon their plans after workers reported equipment malfunctions and psychological distress when near the sealed entrance. The University of Missouri's folklore department collected several versions of the Harland story during the 1,960 seconds, noting how the tale had evolved in oral tradition to include elements not present in historical records, such as claims of survivors who had escaped the final ceremony or treasure buried in unexplored sections of the underground complex. Local historians maintained a small archive of documents and photographs related to the case, though access was restricted due to concerns about encouraging dangerous exploration of the site, particularly after 3 teenagers were injured in 1963 attempting to break through the concrete seal. The approach of the 1,960 seconds counterculture movement, with its interest in alternative spirituality and mysterious events, would soon bring new attention to the long-dormant case, setting the stage for discoveries that would reveal previously unknown dimensions of the Harland brothers' activities and the fate of their followers. In June 1967, Dr. Martin Blackwell, a professor of archaeology at the University of Missouri and grandson of Sheriff William Blackwood, who had led the original investigation, initiated an academic expedition to document and study the Harland mission site using modern archaeological methods. The team's stated goal was to create a comprehensive historical record of the site before further deterioration or development erased physical evidence, though Dr. Blackwell privately admitted to personal motivations stemming from his grandfather's lifelong obsession with the unsolved case. Initial excavations focused on reopening the sealed entrance to the underground complex, a process complicated by the discovery that the 1,901 ceiling had been more extensive than records indicated, with multiple layers of concrete and tons of rubble requiring careful removal to avoid damaging the passages below. Upon breaching the seal, the team encountered air quality issues that required ventilation equipment and revealed that certain chambers had been naturally sealed by limestone deposits, preserving their contents in remarkable condition for over 65 years. The most significant discovery came in what the original investigators had apparently missed: a secondary complex accessed through a concealed door in what had been mapped as a storage chamber, revealing passages that extended even deeper into the hillside than the 1,901 exploration had documented. In this hidden section, the team discovered 14 robes arranged ceremonially in a circular chamber, each robe laid out as if worn by an invisible figure, with personal items placed precisely where hands would rest, creating an eerie tableau suggesting the participants had simply vanished from within their garments. Advanced photographic documentation captured details invisible to earlier investigators, including microscopic analysis of the symbols carved throughout the complex that revealed mathematical patterns and astronomical alignments consistent with various ancient mystical traditions. The team's geologist reported anomalous magnetic readings in certain chambers and unusual crystalline formations that appeared to have been deliberately cultivated or modified, though for what purpose remained unclear. Dr. Blackwell's journal from the expedition, donated to the university archives, describes increasing unease among team members, with several requesting reassignment after reporting vivid nightmares. Equipment malfunctions occurring with suspicious frequency near certain carved symbols, and at least 3 team members independently reporting hearing faint chanting when working alone in the deeper chambers. The discovery of additional written materials, including journals from Inner Circle members hidden in a previously undiscovered cache, provided new insights into the group's final days, and with entries describing intensive meditation practices, fasting regimens, and consumption of various substances intended to prepare their consciousness for what they termed the Great Transition. The 1,967 excavations' most disturbing discovery came in what the team designated Chamber 9, located at the deepest point of the complex, where investigators found evidence that challenged all conventional explanations for the 1,901 disappearances. This circular chamber, approximately 30 feet in diameter, with walls polished to an almost mirror-like finish, contained what appeared to be 14 human-shaped impressions in the solid limestone floor, each depression approximately 2 inches deep and showing anatomically correct details that suggested bodies had somehow been pressed into or merged with the stone itself. Geological analysis could provide no natural explanation for these formations, with the limestone showing no signs of carving or chemical alteration, yet the impressions were undeniably present and matched the exact number of missing persons. Around each impression, investigators found crystalline deposits of an unknown mineral composition that exhibited unusual properties, including faint phosphorescence in darkness and the ability to produce audible tones when subjected to vibration. Dr. Helena Marchant, a specialist in religious archaeology brought in to analyze the site, noted parallels between the chamber's design and certain ancient mystery religion sites, though none matched exactly, suggesting the Harland brothers had created a unique synthesis of various traditions. The team's attempts to fully document Chamber 9 were hampered by technical difficulties that seemed to specifically affect that location, with cameras malfunctioning, recording equipment producing only static, and several team members reporting severe disorientation after spending extended time in the space. The journals discovered in 1967 provided context for these findings, with Inner Circle members describing elaborate preparation rituals designed to transform their physical bodies into what they called vessels of transcendence, including meditation techniques that allegedly allowed consciousness to separate from flesh. One particularly detailed account by Martha Preston described achieving states where she felt her body becoming insubstantial, merging with the stone of the chamber walls, though she noted terror at the sensation and gratitude when Elijah guided her back to normal consciousness. The final entries from various journals, all dated April 29 to 30, 1901, showed remarkable consistency in describing anticipation mixed with fear about the coming transformation, with several members expressing absolute faith that they would emerge from the ceremony as beings no longer bound by physical limitations. Dr. Blackwell's team ultimately sealed Chamber 9 again, declaring it structurally unstable. Though team members privately admitted the space-induced psychological effects they found deeply disturbing and potentially dangerous to extended human presence. Modern analysis of the Harland mission case places it within the broader context of American religious experimentation, while acknowledging elements that resist conventional explanation, creating a puzzle that continues to challenge researchers across multiple disciplines. Psychiatric evaluation of the surviving written materials suggests that while the Harland brothers displayed symptoms consistent with shared delusional disorder, their systematic approach and the sophisticated nature of their underground construction project indicates high-functioning intelligence and organizational capability rarely seen in purely delusional individuals. The chemical analysis of substances found in the complex, conducted with modern techniques unavailable in 1901, revealed a sophisticated understanding of psychoactive compounds that would have been remarkable for rural ministers, suggesting the brothers had access to pharmaceutical knowledge possibly gained during their earlier involvement with other esoteric groups. Comparative religious studies identify elements in the Harland synthesis drawn from Gnosticism, Hermeticism, various Eastern traditions, and indigenous American practices, combined in ways that demonstrate extensive study but also creative innovation in developing their unique theological system. The mathematical patterns embedded in the carved symbols, when analyzed by computer, reveal complex geometric relationships and numerical sequences that some researchers argue encode astronomical data or attempts to represent higher dimensional concepts in two-dimensional form. Sociological analysis of the Inner Circle members' backgrounds reveals patterns common to those drawn to new religious movements, including recent loss, social isolation, and previous interest in spiritual matters, though the complete devotion achieved by the Harlands appears exceptional even within this context. The question of what actually occurred on the 30th of April 1901 remains officially unsolved, with theories ranging from elaborate murder-suicide with exceptionally well-hidden bodies to mass hysteria resulting in dispersal to locations unknown, though neither explanation adequately addresses all evidence. The limestone impressions in Chamber 9 continue to defy scientific explanation, with some researchers proposing they represent an unprecedented case of collective psychological phenomena affecting physical matter, while others suggest deliberate hoaxing through unknown means. The consistent reports across decades of unusual phenomena at the site, while anecdotal, form a pattern that some researchers argue warrants serious investigation rather than dismissal as folklore or suggestion. The case's impact on American religious history includes increased scrutiny of new religious movements and contributions to developing legal frameworks for intervention when groups show signs of potential violence, though critics argue such measures can infringe on religious freedom. The physical site of the former Harland mission remains legally accessible only to researchers with specific permits, though local authorities report ongoing issues with trespassers drawn by internet-propagated legends and paranormal tourism. Current property records show ownership by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, which maintains the site as a historical preserve closed to public access and a public show presents, with regular patrols to prevent unauthorized entry following several injuries to would-be explorers. Reports continue to emerge from hikers and hunters in the area describing encounters with unexplained phenomena, including architectural features that appear and disappear, sounds of singing or chanting with no apparent source, and intense feelings of being watched or followed. Former Stone County Sheriff Robert Hensley, interviewed in 2010, revealed that his department maintains an unofficial policy of not investigating reports from the area unless they involve clear criminal activity, stating that some places are better left alone. Archaeological evidence suggests that parts of the underground complex remain unexplored, with ground-penetrating radar indicating voids beyond the mapped areas, though no modern expedition has attempted to access these spaces due to safety concerns and local opposition. The dispersal of artifacts from the site into private collections has created challenges for researchers, with items periodically surfacing at estate sales or online auctions, often accompanied by claims of strange properties or effects on owners. Digital preservation efforts by the Stone County Historical Society have created comprehensive archives of all known documentation, though certain materials remain restricted due to their disturbing content or potential to encourage dangerous imitation. Modern religious scholars studying the case note its relevance to understanding how charismatic leadership combined with isolation can create conditions for extreme beliefs and behaviors, using it as a teaching example in courses on new religious movements. The families of the disappeared, now several generations removed, maintain varying attitudes toward their ancestors' fate, with some seeking closure through research, while others prefer to leave the past undisturbed. Local oral tradition has incorporated the Harland story into the broader folklore of the Ozarks, with variations that reflect changing cultural anxieties about religion, authority, and the unknown. The enduring mystery of the Harland mission speaks to fundamental questions about the nature of belief, the limits of human experience, and the power of faith to transform or destroy those who embrace it too absolutely. The 14 people who descended into that underground chamber on the 30th of April 1901 believed they were about to transcend physical existence and achieve a state of being beyond human comprehension, and their faith so complete they willingly left behind every earthly connection. Whether they achieved their desired transformation, met a tragic end, or discovered something else entirely remains unknown, leaving only carved symbols, abandoned possessions, and impossible impressions in stone as testimony to their final moments. The Harland brothers, Elijah and Silas, created more than just an underground temple. They built a theological system that convinced rational adults to abandon their lives and families in pursuit of promises that mainstream society deemed impossible. Their journals reveal not madmen but articulate, educated individuals who believed they had discovered truths hidden from humanity, Though whether this belief represents visionary insight or elaborate delusion depends entirely on one's perspective regarding the nature of reality itself. The inner circle members whose names deserve remembrance included James, Sarah, and Daniel Kellum, Martha Preston, Ezra and Caleb Morrison, Eleanor Chase, Thomas Garrett, Mary Hutchins, William and Robert Donnelly, and Samuel Peters, each representing a human story of seeking meaning and finding something that consumed them entirely. The physical evidence, particularly the inexplicable impressions in Chamber 9, continues to challenge scientific explanation, suggesting either an unknown natural phenomenon, an elaborate hoax using lost techniques, or something that exists outside current understanding of physical laws. The investigation records from 1901 and 1967 paint a picture of rational men encountering something that strained their ability to document and explain, leading to sealed chambers and restricted archives that hint at discoveries deemed too disturbing for public consumption. Modern visitors to Stone County can still sense the weight of history in those hills, where limestone caves hold secrets and the wind through the valleys sometimes sounds like distant singing, reminding us that some mysteries are perhaps better left unsolved. The Harland mission case stands as a testament to the human capacity for both transcendent faith and dangerous delusion, the thin line between spiritual breakthrough and collective madness, and the ultimate impossibility of knowing whether 14 souls found salvation or damnation in their underground sanctuary. In the end, what remains is not answers but questions, not closure, but continued wonder at what humans will believe and what they will sacrifice in pursuit of promises of transcendence, leaving us to contemplate whether the Harland brothers were prophets or predators, whether their followers were victims or visionaries, and whether some doors once opened can never truly be closed again.